Hey guys, this is John. All right, something new today. So I'm playing a pair of 25 plus 5 games against one of my students, Patrick. And usually we do normal lessons. We haven't had a lesson in a while, but he suggested playing a pair of standard games at this time control, and I think this ought to be very interesting. So he opens with d4. I haven't given a ton of thought about what I want to play against him, but I know he's been anticipating this match, so I kind of want to get him out of book as early as possible. But I'm going to go with d5, my normal move for now. So 25 plus 5 is a bit longer, but it's not long enough that I'm going to play this any different, I'd say, than 15 plus 2 or 15 plus 10. A little bit longer on the base time control, but 5-second increment is not all that much. Okay, he plays knight f3, just a flexible move. I'll answer with knight f6. This is my usual. And I'll be curious if he goes for c4. I think he will. Yeah, so Patrick is not backing down from the mainline stuff. And I'm going to play e6 instead of c6. I'm just a little worried within c6 he might have some targeted prep. So I'll try to get him, like I said, out of book. Knight c3. And now I'm actually tempted to play c6 when, if he takes on d5, I have the option of taking with the e pawn rather than the c pawn. So I don't have to go into a exchange Slav. That is one of the downsides of the pure Slav move order, is that you allow the exchange Slav. I don't know if he was planning on going into that, but just trying to throw him a little bit of a curveball this early. So Patrick plays, I think, almost exclusively online, but he's quite a good player. I mean, if I were to put his over-the-board strength at something, it would probably be 17, 1800 at least. So I'm not going to take these games lightly by any means, and I never do, regardless of the opposition. I've got my coffee. I'm ready to go. This is not actually Starbucks. This is Caribou. So I'm cheating on Starbucks with a local franchise. So the main move here for white is bishop g5. That's the most ambitious move white can play at this juncture, and it can lead to sharp play if I decide to play d takes c4 or h6. Bishop g5, d takes c4 is the Botvinnik variation of the Semi-Slav. h6 could lead to the Moscow or anti-Moscow variation. But he plays e3, which is in fact the most popular move. It's, I'd say, not as critical as bishop g5, but this is still very much a mainline move. So I'm just going to play knight bd7. And the idea here is to wait for this light square bishop to develop before capturing on c4. So if he plays bishop d3, I will then take. He could also play queen c2, however. That's the anti-Moran variation. But no, he's going to go for bishop d3. Okay. Yeah, let's capture. So you make the light square bishop waste a little time, and now I'm going to play b5, gain a tempo. Yeah, and bishop d3 is the main move. So here, I can play a6 or bishop b7. I usually play bishop b7, so I think I'm going to stick with that move. Yeah, let's go with bishop b7. And this structure looks awkward for black, having pawns on c6 and b5, but I eventually would like to achieve b5, either by playing a6 first to, achieve c5 rather, by playing a6 first and guarding the b5 pawn, or potentially playing b4, kicking this knight, and then playing c5. Depends a bit on how he's going to play it. So he just castles, okay. So a6 now is the main move. Again, looking to play c5 as quick as possible. I know I can also try c5 right here, but I'm probably going to go for a6. Yeah, I'm just trying to refresh my memory on some of the sharper stuff that can happen after a6 and then e4. Yeah, let's play a6. Now, one of the main things is if white develops routinely here, if they play a move like queen e2, rook d1, black gets in c5 and is very happy. I think e4 at this juncture is the only critical move. So let's see if Patrick goes for that. It's kind of fun playing a mini match. This is like the World Cup or something. Match with white. one game and black the next game, or vice versa. Although I don't think we'll be going to a tiebreaker if it's tied 1-1. Maybe we will, actually. That would be fun. And Patrick is also doing his own commentary on these games. And I believe he's going to upload it to YouTube. So if he does, I will definitely link you guys in the comments or the description down below. So after e4, c5, the critical move there is d5 from white. And if that happens, I think I'll play queen c7, which is the most flexible move. I could also play c4, but queen c7, taking control of this diagonal and enabling castling queenside is usually what black opts for. I used to go in for these sharper lines of the Semi-Slav, but it's been several years since I studied the theory properly from the black side. I've mostly been playing the Slav since then. The Semi-Slav is one of the best openings against d4, though. You know, many top players have relied on it. Let's go c5 here. You do have to know quite a bit of theory, though, especially in the event of that bishop g5 variation I was referencing. Sometimes playing the Botvinnik variation just boils down to your memory, how confident you are in memorizing reams and reams of theory. So as I was saying, d5 is the critical move here. I remember a standard game I had where white played e5, which is not supposed to be as good, but I'll have to recall what to do there. I think the move is bishop takes f3, if I'm not mistaken. But if he plays e5, I'm going to give that some thought, because I remember in that standard game, which was played quite a while ago, I had some issues recalling what to do after this e-pawn push. But he plays bishop g5. Okay. That's not a move I'm aware of. So pinning the knight, trying to threaten e5. But the thing is, if I take on d4 now, I'm hitting his knight on c3. So that might require him to take with the knight. And I think that's actually a bit of a minor victory for me. Just scanning the position to see if there's anything other than c takes d4 that I'd like to do here. But no, I think c takes d4 is for sure going to be the move. Yeah, take on d4, e5, I take on c3, he takes f6, I can take with the pawn. I'm not at all afraid of that continuation. Take on d4, he could take on b5 maybe. Take and then play e5, but the thing is, after h6, he's not going to be winning his piece back for free. Bishop h4, there's g5, as happens in the Botvinnik variation. So yeah, let's make this capture. And I anticipate him taking with the knight. And once he plays that, I have some tempting options. I think knight c5 comes to mind, hitting his bishop and also hitting his knight on d4 would be a discovered attack there. Although I guess I'm not really threatening to take his knight because a bishop takes b5 check. So I'll consider knight c5, but also moves like queen b6 or bishop c5 or even bishop d6. Yeah, there's lots of good options here. And now e5 is no longer a threat because my knight is covering that square and his knight is not. Okay. Bishop d6 is kind of attractive too. Yeah, just get the bishop to this nice diagonal. Yeah, knight c5 I'm not so convinced by now. Once I realize that queen takes d4 isn't a threat. I mean, knight c5, maybe he could even play e5. So I think I'm going to discard that from my thought process. Queen b6 looks decent, trying to force the knight away. But I think bishop d6 is the move I'd really like to play here. If he goes f4, then I have bishop c5, and that knight will be problematic for him to defend. What about bishop d6, king h1, though? Trying to play f4 in the future. Could be a little irritating. I could also just play a move like bishop e7 here and get ready to castle. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Knight e5 maybe has an advantage over knight c5 that I'm stopping white from playing e5. So certainly I could consider that move. If knight e5, I gain some influence over the g4 square as well. I mean, I know I'm still not threatening queen takes d4, but that move is sort of appealing to me now. Also stops his knight from running away. Because on bishop c5, which is an obvious developing move with tempo, I'm thinking he's going to play knight f3 and try to threaten e5. And I'll have to take a move to stop that threat, maybe queen b8 or something. And that too looks completely fine, but I just wonder if I'm better off with knight e5. So many options. Let's go with knight e5. Yeah. Let's play that one. So I'll keep the c5 square open in case I want to put my bishop there. I'll block white from ever playing e5. I put pressure here and here, even if I'm not ready to take. If f4, knight takes d3, queen takes d3, bishop c5. And I gotta believe I'm doing well in that position with the pin on the knight. I don't think he'll lose that knight yet, but yeah, that pin looks promising. Oh, and actually f4 is just a straight blunder because of queen takes d4 check. That would come with check, so yeah, important to note that he flat out can't play that move. I think it's most likely that Patrick will move his light square bishop. He'll play bishop c2 or bishop e2 here. And I'm thinking then bishop c5. Just get the bishop out with tempo. I should also keep in mind that b4 might come in handy later if I want to kick the knight away from the defense of the e4 pawn. Let's say bishop e2, bishop c5, I don't know, knight c2, and we get a trade of queens. I might be able to play b4 and take here. Although my position does become looser if I play b4. He does get the a4 square for his knight. So I spent 3 minutes on that last move. Yeah, in a 15+2 game, that would be more severe, but you do have a bit more leeway with how you can think in the opening, I suppose, or the early middle game. But still, for the most part, I think you should be making pretty quick decisions in these games. I mean, I can't be spending 3 minutes every move. I'm not worried about the sack on b5. I don't see that leading to anything. He has 3 different pieces he could sack here, but I have resources against them in all cases. So I'm thinking bishop e2 or c2. Let's say bishop c2, bishop c5, and then a knight move is logical. maybe knight f3. But then I could always go into a pleasant endgame, queen takes d1, and then take on f3, or maybe even reinforce the knight on e5 and move like knight d7. Once I get my bishop out, I'm ready to castle. Even if the queens come off the board, it's probably a position where I will castle, especially if the bishop's on g5, because I won't be able to tuck my king on e7. Okay, so he's thinking quite a bit here as well. There's nothing with knight takes e6 that I have to worry about. Knight takes e6, fe, and then maybe after a trade on f6, the queen making an appearance on h5. That just doesn't work. My knight will be defended either by my pawn or my queen. I think the crux of White's problems here are the knight and the bishop lined up. Because in this structure, unless your pawn is going to come to e5, you're much better off having the pawn back on e3. The bishop will have more scope. You can use the e4 square. But with the knight and bishop lined up like this and the pawn here, these pieces are weak, and knight e5 exploits that. So as I said, I think he'll play his bishop away. I don't see too many other decent options. I mean, he probably recognizes that queen takes d4 isn't the threat, but it's still so awkward that you don't want to play around with this. I mean, one potential threat I have is knight takes d3, queen takes d3, e5, pinning the knight. I mean, maybe White could muddy the waters with knight d5 there, since my pawn would no longer be standing on e6, but it's probably insufficient compensation for White. Yeah, and he does move the bishop away. I think that's a good decision. And here I was planning bishop c5, which I'll probably stick with. Bishop c5, and if knight b3, maybe just bishop a7, or trade queens first. Yeah, I think it's premature to play b4. I don't want to deal with the check on a4. So let's just get this guy out. Develop with tempo. This knight could be handy jumping into the c4 square too. Yeah, in fact, if bishop e3, I'll consider a knight coming to g4 or c4. I do have to watch out for knight takes e6, but I wonder if that even works tactically for White. I can take on d1 and then try to take his bishop. He might have a knight c7 check, but it's something I can calculate. Yeah, I like my position here. Okay, knight f3. I'm thinking trade the queens. He's attacking e5 now. If I take on f3, that just helps him develop. Queen takes f3. I would still have his e-pawn pinned, but I'm thinking trading queens is better. And seeing which way he recaptures. Because after I trade queens, I'll have the option of taking on f3 with check and doubling his pawns, or reinforcing e5, or maybe even knight c4. Yeah, the only other real option is something like queen c7 or queen b8, but I don't like those. Maybe bishop f4 in that case. So, all right. Let's swap these guys. And he had rook a takes pre-move, so he made up his mind pretty quick. Now, do I reinforce or take? Kind of like reinforcing. Because if I take, Even though I do double his pawns, I can't use the g4 square in the future. e4 is better defended. I feel like reinforcing is going to give him more problems. There's also that knight c4 move, but knight c4 b3, I don't see a good follow-up. So yeah, I think I'm just going to do this. Now his bishop doesn't have a whole lot to do out here. Fortunately, my rook is on a8, so if there's a trade on e5, there's no rook d8 checkmate. Always got to watch that mating pattern with a rook and a bishop. And by the way, this is not his rating. He just made a new account on chess.com, so this is his rating he starts with. Not his actual strength, I should say. So why do I feel I'm slightly better here? Well, I think it's two things. It's the pawn structure and also the fact that my pieces occupy more active positions. So the pawn structure favors black because the pawn on e4 is just overextended. As I was saying earlier, it'd be better if that pawn was on e3. Then the bishop would have more scope. There's more opportunities for the knight to jump to the center, e4, or maybe this knight coming to d4. Pawn on e4 in this structure is just a target. If white could ever get this pawn up to f3, that may not be the case, but white's going to have to work hard to do that. Also, the structure on the queen side is nice for black. a6, b5, that's about as best as it can possibly get with those two pawns over there. Plays bishop f4. Probably a good move. Kind of tempted to play f6 here and give him the option of doubling up my pawns. But if he does that, I really like those pawns on e6 and e5. So let's say f6, knight takes, and if bishop takes. Looks nice for me. Dark square bishop will have a lot of influence there. And after f6, I might just keep my king in the center. I might play it to e7 now that his bishop's not on g5. Again, I'm not so thrilled about taking and letting him recapture towards the center. Knight c4, again, this b3 move, maybe I can stick my knight on a3, but it looks like after bishop d3, the knight isn't doing a heck of a lot over there. Yeah, let's give this move a shot. If f6, bishop b3, I can just play king e7. Don't think that's any issue. Yeah, let's try it. Yeah, the fact that my king can just waltz up to e7 is quite nice here. And there's no checks I have to worry about on d5 or f5 in the future. Maybe one line I should have looked at in greater detail is something like bishop here, king e7, knight d4. Trying to put pressure here. I could always just play knight f8 against that, or maybe knight c4. But maybe I should have looked at that a bit closer. Because by playing f6, I do create a weakness here. But still, feeling good about this. And I have a time edge at this point, 5 minutes. I can imagine it's not easy for him. I mean, he doesn't record and play regularly, so this is probably a completely new experience. And he's playing an IM. So kudos to you, Patrick, for deciding to do that. Yeah, let's look at that continuation. Bishop b3, king e7, knight d4. think I'm leaning towards playing knight f8 there. And then trying to attack this knight. Knight c4 also looks decent too, though. Bishop b3, king e7, knight d4, knight c4. Yeah, he's going to go there. Okay. Yeah, play king e7. Looks normal. I mean, on knight d4, it would actually be nice if my knight was not on e5, so I could take on d4 and then play e5 and fork him, but that's not going to be the case. And he's going to take. Interesting. Okay, my instinct is just to take with the knight. Could take with the pawn, but he'll probably deliver a check, and then, yeah, I have to block on f6. That's not as desirable, so I think taking with the knight is my better bet here. Yeah, let's do that. And he takes again. Okay. Wonder what he has in mind. He's just going to try to prepare this pawn to come up, either to f3, maybe f4, but probably f3 just to reinforce. Okay. Well, I like this development for me. And I was a bit worried about that e6 point, but now I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, optically these pawns are bad, but the dark square bishop has a ton of influence in this position. So let's figure out how I can start exploiting that. The first thing I'm looking at here is if I can just outright win this e-pawn. So I was looking at b4, trying to kick the knight away, but after knight a4, not so convinced. I mean, maybe I can just play bishop d4 there. f3. The bishop is pretty nice on the d4 square. But somehow bishop d4 seems premature. b4 rather seems premature. I think I'd like to keep this pawn on b5 longer. I could play bishop here right away. I'm sure he'll play f3 against that. Rook c8, rook d3, something along those lines. Maybe b4 merits more consideration. Because it is attractive to banish his knight to a4. Whereas when he plays f3, he's going to have options with the knight once he gets that move in. So let's say b4, knight a4, bishop d4. He'll probably play f3. I mean, maybe even a move like bishop c6 to b5. Bishop d4 on the other hand, f3. I could take on c3 there and start trying to hammer the c3 pawn, but I'm really loath to trade off my dark square bishop for his knight. Even if I give him a weak c3 pawn, I think he can defend that pawn. Could also just play rook d8 here. But he's going to go f3. Rook d8 feels like one of those lazy moves, just centralizing a rook without any particular purpose. So let's take another look at this. b4, knight a4, bishop d4. Not worried about rook takes d4, I don't think. Yeah, that doesn't appear to lead to anything. So he'll play f3. Let's say bishop c6, rook c1, bishop b5. That just seems like a nice improvement. The bishop. Maybe he can check on c7 and play his other rook over there. So b4, bishop, knight a4, bishop d4, f3. Maybe I play rook c8 first. Rook c1. Guess I could always trade down, like trade off all the rooks. We might get bishop c4 in at the end. Maybe just play a5 there. Yeah, maybe a5 would be a decent option at that point. Still, there's something about this b4 move that I don't quite like. I think it's the fact that the bishop might eventually get to the c4 square if I play b4. But at the same time, I really want to play that. b4, knight a4, bishop d4, f3. Let's say rook a c8, rook c1. I could just play bishop c6 at that point. Do I have time for that? Yeah, bishop c6. Because then he can't play bishop c4 because his knight would hang. So you'd probably have to do something like, I don't know, rook c2. You know what? I'm going to go for this move. Yeah, I'll play it. It is a little loosening, and I hope that I don't regret giving him these squares. But I really like that idea of just banishing his knight to the side of the board. That appeals to me a lot. Yeah, and this is going to go kind of how I anticipated here. Let's get this rook to this square. And I expect him to dispute the file. I'm not exactly threatening to infiltrate down the file, but I still think he wants a rook on it to be able to, you know, at some point maybe play bishop c4, b3, rearrange like that. One nice thing here is I don't have to worry about a lot of pawn breaks. You can see he played f3 rather than f4. Understandable because he wants to keep e4 protected. So the king side, not much is going on. I think the action is going to be in this area of the board, queen side. So I'm thinking on rook c1, I'm going to play bishop c6 and stop him from playing bishop c4 because of the capture here. Rook c1, bishop c6. If rook c4, I can play bishop b5 right away. He can't take on b4 because he loses the rook on f1. His rook should be skewered. So he'd have to cede the file in that case, and that wouldn't be good. Rook c1, bishop c6, rook c2 seems better. There, though, I do have the option of winning a pawn. I could take on a4, and let's say he takes back, I take on c2, he takes with the bishop, I take on b2 at the very end. So he does play rook c1. If here, knight c5, bishop b5 just seems to win material. So that's very nice. Yeah, I don't have to worry about a capture on e6 there. Just making sure knight takes e6 doesn't work. I can always take on f1 in that case. Yeah, okay, let's go for it. So 10 minutes remaining. He has caught up somewhat on the clock. My big thinks so far have been on that knight e5 move and also that b4 move. I spent 5.5 minutes on b4. A long think, but these other moves, these follow-up moves, seem natural to me, and that was a big decision whether to banish the knight to a4 or wait, keep the pawn on b5. But I think I like where this is heading. So I'm going to try to play bishop b5 next and harass this rook. And my hope is that later on in the game, this knight just proves to be very awkward. It might require the eternal defense of the bishop, and I might also always have this option of taking on a4 and taking on b2 and trying to grind him down with an extra pawn, which could be significant. I know opposite color bishop endings are drawish, but that could be significant with his king being so far away and mine being a little closer to the action. And still, the only defect I have in this position really is this set of doubled pawns, double isolated e-pawns. And also maybe the b4 pawn could be loose in some cases, but I think I gained more than I lost by pushing b4 in terms of forcing white's knight to the edge of the board. My best piece is definitely this bishop on d4. Influencing both wings, keeping that king restricted. It's really nice. Yeah, and he plays rook c2. I think that's a good decision. So he is offering me a chance to win a pawn. But in doing so, I'd have to trade down to a opposite color bishop position. Bishop takes. And let's say bishop takes. Trade the rooks, take on b2. Do I kind of sell out for that now? Or do I play bishop b5? Bishop b5, he's going to double up his rooks. And then trade. Probably king d6 there. He's still kind of stuck. That might be a nice position for me to play. It's just so hard for his knight to ever get in the action. Then I'll have to look at expanding on the king side somehow. So I'm going to go for that, the bishop b5 move, unless this line starts to convince me. So let's look at bishop takes a4. Bishop takes a4, bishop takes. And you could insert the capture on c8. It doesn't affect things much. So bishop takes, rook takes c2, bishop takes c2, bishop takes b2. It's still pretty nice for me. Maybe I should go for that line with his king being just so bad there on h1. I feel like there's a decent chance that my king is going to be the X factor somehow. Like if the rooks get swapped, it's really nice. Whereas with bishop b5, rook here, take, king d6, I'm more so playing the long game. And again, just hoping that his knight is the bigger factor. But I'm going to kind of have to switch over to the king side to make progress, which looks kind of tough to do. He's probably going to play g3, king g2. And it is appealing to have his pieces essentially frozen over there. But I kind of don't like that I have to start playing on the king side more there. It's a tough decision. That opposite color bishop position just looks so awkward for him. Because I feel like it's not going to be easy for him to blockade my pawns. Maybe he sticks his bishop on a4, though, and just waits. Okay, let's take a look at this line again. Bishop e5, rook c1, trade that pair of rooks, king d6 just to stop knight c5. I mean, he really is pretty stuck there. If a3, I can always just play a5. That doesn't help him. So probably he'll play g3. G3, G5, King G2, something like that. H5. I just wish there was an additional way to attack this knight in the future. Some Zugzwang ideas maybe, but... Man, tough call here. Tough one. All right, I think I'm going to go for the opposite color bishop situation. I mean, the other way looks nice too, but I think I like this a bit better. So, all right, we're going to get the trade now. And let's take. I mean, it's an extra pawn. The king is close. The A and the B pawns will be dangerous. It's not easy for him to blockade these because, you know, say he just puts his bishop on B3 and waits. I can always play A5, rook A8, and threaten A4. I mean, he might have to switch his bishop to A4, but I feel like I might be able to get in down one of the files sooner or later. And I can always stick this bishop back on D4 and just challenge his king to get out. It takes him so long to play G3, king here, zigzag over on the light squares, and that's going to create further weaknesses like F3. Yeah, he needs to come up with a good defensive plan here. Could start with rook D1. I'll probably play rook C8 in that case. And if bishop A4, we're looking for rook D7, then slam the door with bishop D4. And maybe look to infiltrate rook C3, rook A3, A5, A4, that sort of thing. If rook B1, just bishop C3. No harm, no foul. Hold the pawn. So I actually take back what I said earlier about 25 plus 5, my strategy not being exactly the same, or my strategy being exactly the same as a 15 plus 2. I recognize now this helped a lot, being able to think for longer periods at critical moments. In 15 plus 2, I don't often have that luxury. So yeah, there is something to be said for that. Okay, rook C8 is my instinct here. But there's also A5 to consider. Rook C8, I just want to take over the file, basically. But A5 might be more to the point. Yeah, maybe it is. A5, rook B1, I can then play rook C8. It's a nice nuance. Yeah, let's do that. 4 minutes, 35 seconds. I am allowing F4 here, but I don't know if I mind that move so much. Take, rook takes, rook C8. He'll have to guard the back rank. So A5, just always, I making a4 something he'll have to think about in the future, especially if I play rook a8. That'll become a threat. I think what will likely happen on rook a8 is he'll switch his bishop to a4. And he's going to go h3. Okay. I think this move is wrong. I could see the desire to put pawns on dark squares, but I'm happy to see that. I would have been more concerned about some sort of future g3 f4 plan. Because he just makes his dark squares so weak by doing this. That is most people's instincts, though, in these endgames. But we'll see if I'm right about this being inaccuracy. Yeah, so I'm going to go here. And I'm expecting this move. Does play it. Okay, now I think I'm going to switch this back. If rook d1, again, this bishop d4 move. My next plan is to come in here like this. Try to get his bishop to come back to b3 and then play a4. Because to make progress on the queen side, I need to get a4 in sooner or later. And I prefer to do it when I was attacking his bishop. Okay, so bishop d4. Stop his counterplay there. He might think about this move now, maybe. f4, let's say rook c3, take. But again, you can see the fact that his pawn's on h3 with my bishop on e5, I still have influence over his king. He'd rather have that pawn be on g3 to block the bishop. So he can't like go check and go try to raid my pawns. There's back rank stuff to consider. Could play rook d3 here, but I do get a check. Maybe I swing over to a1. Yeah, not a simple defense for white. That still might be his best bet. Rook d3, check, king h2. Wonder if I can almost play rook c3. If he does that, and if take, pawn takes, and again, my king being close might matter. I might just waltz up all the way to b2. Because it's so hard for his king to get over to help out and guard the c2 square. Okay, so I can consider that. Probably check first. But maybe not. So let's say rook c3, take. Let's say, I don't know, g3, king d6, king g2, king c5, king f1, king b4. He has to move his bishop then. Let's say bishop b3, there's a4. Rook c3, rook takes, b takes, g3, king d6, king g2, king c5, king f1, king b4. Let's just say bishop c2. King a3. I'm hitting that a pawn then, though, too. It's pretty nasty. Rook c3 could be really annoying. Maybe he can play a3, though, and keep my king out. No, my king always seems like it's going to get in somehow. I mean, normally you wouldn't trade rooks here, but with his king so far afield, I'm just very tempted to. Just counting the tempos, it appears to work for me. Yeah, I think I'm going to do it. And take with the pawn. And just try this. And ask him how he's going to get his king over to help. Because I don't think he can create a blockade with just his bishop and his pawn here. He took right away, so he must feel like there is a blockade. But I'm not seeing it. And if he loses 2 pawns, that seems like it'll be on the verge of losing, even if his king does get over to help. I might even switch back over to the king side at some point. Yeah, he's going to go g4, so he's going to try to use this route for his king. But let's bring our king up. Just have the jump on him, and king b4 even wins a tempo. Because now I attack this with tempo. I mean, if bishop b3, I can already play king here. So I think he has to just straight up give up that pawn. Some outside chances of a fortress, but that'll be tough. King d3, yeah, he makes the right call there. Okay, so definitely take this guy. So next, I'll probably have to play the king back to a3. He's going to play there, but maybe that loses a tempo. Yeah, king here. Just always have to be wary of fortresses in these positions, but it's hard. It's very hard for him. Okay. So his bishop's probably going to have to come back to b1 soon. Like right now, probably. Yep, he does. Okay, let's repeat once. I'm thinking about king a3 here. Yeah, let's go king a3. Because now I can go here, is the thing. And that pawn is going to sneak by. Yeah, he made that decision pretty fast. I wonder if... Okay, so after king a3, he has to play a waiting move. So if he plays bishop d1, what do I do? I might have to start working back towards the king side eventually. But it's possible he gets a fortress here. It's interesting. Yeah, bishop d1 was much better. I was hoping he would play king c4 because that looks like a decent move, but as you saw after this, if he takes the pawn, then I get c2 in and he has to give up the bishop, and that's going to lose. That was a very close one. So just to kind of forecast what I was saying, let's say king a3, if he just played bishop d1, king b4, bishop here. Although actually that's a problem now after a3, isn't it? a3, bishop here, I come in. Yeah, and that pawn's going to queen. Okay, so maybe it's harder for him to find a waiting move than I thought. If king c4 doesn't work, maybe just king e2 as the waiting move. Now king e2, king b2 again. So he needs his king on d3. The king has to stay here. And he could play f4. I was thinking he might try that. f4, though, I almost wonder if I can just take. Take here. Take. And e5 might win. Yeah, I think e5 check. King d3 here. He just messaged me on Skype. He said, successful fortress if I keep the king on d3. Yeah, analyzing that right now. I don't know, though, because you need the king exactly on d3, and you don't have any waiting moves with the bishop. So you have to resort to playing pawn moves, it seems to me, after this king a3 move. And pawn moves are going to stick the pawns on dark squares, and you're going to run out of the pawn moves soon. Whereas I guess I can always play king here. Although when I play king b4, he does get to play bishop b1. Worth pointing out. Okay, so maybe not f4, maybe g5, let's say. g5 or h4. Let's say h4. h4, and then... I don't know, let's say king b4, bishop b1. Because the thing about bishop b1, if ever I play a3, he's going to switch the bishop to a2 and blockade that way. So maybe I triangulate like this again to gain another tempo. Force him to push one more time. Let's say h5 just to keep pawns on light squares. h6. And this might be a zugzwang. Yeah, because any king move I can play king here successfully. And if he takes the pawn, play c2. Bishop d1 allows this king b4 move, like I was saying. Unless he can do this, maybe, but if he waits with the bishop, this is the problem. King gets up to this square. Once the king gets here with the pawns here and here, that's over. Maybe he can try this. But it doesn't... I don't believe it. So now I'm going to start trying to get my king in here. One of these squares. Yeah, it seems like it should lose. Let's say bishop c5. If he plays bishop e2, trying to stop king here, then this. He's got to go back to d1, king here. I think I'm getting in now. I don't know, let's just say bishop here, kind of a waiting move. Yeah, this doesn't seem like it's defensible. These pawns are too valuable on the 6th rank. And this pawn is weak. So I think that fortress is crackable in view of zugzwang ideas. If he had some sort of useful waiting move with his king and his bishop here, king or bishop, then maybe, but it appears to me he just has to start moving these pawns and weakening his setup. Very interesting endgame. I'll be curious to run that through the computer later. But that was a big decision. Because when you have a better position and you're squeezing your opponent strategically, you often face this dilemma. Do you continue squeezing them, trying to restrict their pieces, gain more space, that sort of thing? Or at some point, do you try to go for material? And I decided to go for material. It was only a pawn, and I knew that opposite color bishops, it's always going to be tougher to win. But his king was just so bad over here on the king side it felt like he was going to have an uphill battle to make a draw. The other option, though, as I was describing, was playing after rook c2, bishop b5, rook here, trade a pair of rooks, play king d6, and just play off of his much worse placed pieces. But I didn't see a clear breakthrough here. I thought, okay, he's going to play g3. He's going to try to get his king out. I'm going to probably try to do something on the king side. Like, I don't know, something like this, let's say, maybe g4 in the future. Try to weaken e4. And I'm sure I'm a lot better here, but I opted for the more concrete option. But yeah, in the opening, I think that bishop g5 move, Patrick, that was a slight mistake. Yeah, and this is a theoretical position. d5 is the main move here. I was also a little surprised that in this position you decided to take on e5, because I think once you get this structure, black is clearly better. Even though I have double isolated pawns, the dark square bishop is just a beast of a piece. So maybe, instead of that, maybe this knight d4 move forced me to respond to the e6 weakness was better, whereupon I was considering knight c4 or knight f8. Okay, very interesting and competitive first game, though. So let me know if you guys have any thoughts or comments. Post them below. I'll link to Patrick's commentary as well. And we're going to play the second game here. All right, bye, guys.